The interview that changed everything. Rain poured down in relentless sheets across the glass skyline as Eleanor Brooks hurried through the crowded streets of downtown. Her umbrella had broken in the wind, her hair clung damp to her face, and her worn coat could no longer fight the cold. She had never imagined that life could push a person this far. Once a confident design student with dreams of creating art that touched hearts, now reduced to sending out endless applications that no one even read. The envelope in her bag reminded her how cruel the world could be. A final eviction notice, 30 days until her and her little boy Liam would have nowhere to sleep. She had sold her jewelry, canceled every unnecessary bill, and even pawned her grandmother's bracelet. Yet the debt kept growing like a shadow that refused to leave. Her phone buzzed just as she crossed the intersection. For a moment she thought it was another scam email, but the subject line froze her in place. Private assistant to CEO. Immediate opening. The pay looked almost unreal, far beyond anything she had seen. Enough to save her home, maybe even secure Liam's education. The message contained only an address, the Zenith Tower, penthouse level, and a single instruction: bring identification. Confidentiality required. No company name, no HR signature, nothing. A rational part of her screamed caution, but desperation has a way of silencing reason. That night she barely slept. She ironed her only good suit twice, mended a missing button by candlelight, and kissed Liam's forehead as he dreamed, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. By dawn she stood before the mirrored walls of the Zenith Tower, its name carved in silver across the marble floor. Inside, silence hung like luxury. Every surface gleamed, every sound softened. The receptionist barely looked up before pointing toward the private elevator that rose directly to the top. When the doors opened, a tall man in a gray suit awaited her. His name, he said, was Mr. Cole, the personal secretary to the company's owner. His face betrayed nothing. His words were short, efficient, and final. Mr. Grant will see you now. The office that greeted her felt like another world, a cathedral of glass and steel that looked down upon the city as though it owned every light within it. Behind a vast mahogany desk sat the man whose name dominated headlines and financial magazines, Damian Grant, the enigmatic billionaire known for building empires out of ashes and breaking rivals without a second thought. He was younger than she expected, early 30s perhaps, with sharp features and eyes that could freeze a storm. He didn't rise when she entered, didn't smile, didn't even glance up at first. Only when he finally spoke did his voice carry the quiet authority of someone who was never told no. "Miss Brooks," he said, finally meeting her eyes, "you are 31, single, a mother, and 2 months behind on rent. You have no current employment, though your last client praised your reliability. You studied design but abandoned your degree when your father fell ill." Her heart stumbled. How do you know that?" "I make it my business to know the people who wish to stand near me," he replied, tapping the side of a tablet that likely contained every detail of her life. "Tell me, Miss Brooks, why do you want this job?" She swallowed the lump in her throat. "Because I need to provide for my son. Because I'll work harder than anyone else you'll meet. Because I don't give up, even when I'm scared." For a brief instant, she thought she saw something shift in his expression. Not pity, but recognition, as if her words echoed something buried inside him. Then it vanished. "Loyalty and endurance," he murmured, standing and walking toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Those are the only currencies I trust." He turned back, every movement controlled, deliberate. "This position requires complete discretion. You will live on my estate, handle both corporate and personal matters, and be on call at all hours. In return, I will pay you $50,000 per month, plus residence and schooling for your child." Elena's breath caught. The offer sounded impossible, too vast, too sudden. "There must be a condition," she whispered. "There is," Damian replied. "Before you enter my home or my company, you must remove everything that hides the truth. No masks, no pretenses. No lies," she frowned, confused. "I don't understand." He stepped closer, his gaze piercing. "Every person I've ever trusted has betrayed me. For money, for fame, for revenge. So when I hire someone to work beside me, I need them stripped of every deception, every layer they hide behind. You will be asked questions that touch nerves you may wish to keep covered. You'll confront memories that hurt. In other words, Miss Brooks, he paused, his voice lowering. You will have to take off your defenses one by one. Emotionally. Completely. For a moment, she thought he was joking. But his eyes held no amusement, only an unsettling sincerity. The phrase that escaped her lips came unbidden, trembling. Please, don't make me take off my clothes. Damien's jaw tightened, and the faintest crack appeared in his stoic mask. You misunderstand me, he said quietly. What I ask of you isn't humiliation. It's honesty. I can't protect someone I don't understand. I can't trust what hides behind fear. The silence that followed felt heavy. Elena's pulse thundered in her ears. Part of her wanted to flee. Another part, the part that had fought through every sleepless night and still kept standing, wanted to believe that maybe this ruthless man was testing her courage. Finally, she lifted her chin. If you want honesty, Mr. Grant, you'll get it. I'm terrified. I don't know what kind of world you live in, but mine has been falling apart for years. I'm tired of pretending everything's fine. I'll work for you. But I won't let anyone break me again. For the first time, his lips curved into something resembling a smile. Faint, fleeting, but real. Good, he said simply. Then we understand each other. He handed her a sleek folder. Inside was a contract and a small card bearing his private address. Report to this location tomorrow morning. Bring your child. Your new life begins there. As she left the office, the storm had eased, though the streets still shimmered with rain. She walked in silence, her reflection mirrored in the wet pavement, wondering what she had just agreed to. Something about Damien Grant unsettled her, not just his power, but the loneliness she sensed beneath it. He was a man surrounded by walls so high that even he seemed trapped inside them. That night, as she tucked Liam into bed, his small hand reached for hers. "Mommy, are we going to have a new home?" he asked, his eyes bright with innocent hope. "Yes," she whispered, brushing his hair back gently. "A new home and a new start. But Mommy's going to have to be brave, okay?" The next morning dawned clear and golden. The city looked gentler under sunlight, as if trying to bless her decision. A black car waited outside her apartment, its driver silent, its doors gleaming like a promise. As she and Liam climbed in, Elena looked once more at the life she was leaving behind, cracked walls, unpaid bills, broken dreams, and whispered a quiet prayer. Whatever awaited them beyond those iron gates, she would face it with her head high. And somewhere in a towering glass office, Damien Grant watched her departure on a security feed, his expression unreadable. The woman had said she wouldn't break. He wondered if that would still be true once she saw what kind of man she had chosen to work for. The mansion of secrets. The road to the Grant estate stretched beyond the city, winding through silent hills and misty trees that seemed to whisper forgotten stories. The car's hum was the only sound breaking the stillness, and Elena sat quietly beside her sleeping son, her thoughts a storm of uncertainty. The world outside felt different now, distant from the chaos of crowded buses, late rent payments, and flickering lights in her old apartment. Yet the further she went from the city, the more her chest tightened, as if she were leaving behind the last pieces of herself that still felt familiar. When the car finally slowed, she opened her eyes to see gates taller than any she had ever imagined, carved from black iron and crowned with the Grant family crest. They opened silently, revealing a long cobblestone driveway lined with lanterns that glowed faintly even under daylight. The mansion that emerged from behind the trees looked more like a fortress than a home. Its towering stone walls carried the weight of old money, power, and mystery. Yet, as the sunlight touched the ivy creeping across its edges, there was also something hauntingly beautiful about it, a place where time itself seemed afraid to move too fast. A woman in a crisp uniform met them at the entrance. Her face carried the polite stillness of someone who had served for years without a single mistake. "Welcome, Miss Brooks. My name is Margaret. I oversee the household staff. Mr. Grant is expecting you." Her voice was soft yet firm, the kind of tone that demanded quiet respect. She motioned toward another maid who carefully lifted Liam from the car, still half asleep, and carried him inside as though he were royalty. Elena's protective instinct bristled for a moment, but when she saw how gently they handled her child, her fears eased slightly. Inside, the mansion opened into a world Elena could barely comprehend. The marble floors gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers. A grand staircase spiraled upward like something from a dream. Every wall was adorned with portraits, men and women of the Grant lineage, eyes painted so vividly that they seemed to watch every movement. But the most striking thing was the silence. No laughter, no voices, no sign of a home being lived in, only the distant ticking of an unseen clock. Margaret led her through a series of long corridors until they reached a massive oak door. "He's waiting inside," she said before stepping back with a bow of her head. Elena hesitated only a moment before pushing the door open. The office was darker than she expected, filled with the scent of aged books and polished wood. Damian Grant stood by the fireplace, a faint light outlining his tall figure. He turned as she entered, his eyes sharp yet calm, the same controlled intensity that had unsettled her the day before. "You're punctual," he said, setting aside a glass of water. "Good. Punctuality is the first sign of discipline." Elena nodded, unsure what to say. Liam peeked out from behind her, clutching his toy car nervously. For the first time, something softened in Damian's expression. He knelt down, a rare gesture from a man who seemed incapable of lowering himself before anyone, and met the child's curious eyes. "And you must be Liam," the boy nodded shyly. "Mommy says you're the boss." Damian's lips curved almost imperceptibly. "Your mother is right. But today, she's the real boss, because she's the one who'll make sure I don't lose my mind." Elena blinked at him, caught off guard. "Lose your mind?" she asked, half smiling. "I have no patience for mistakes, no tolerance for lies, and no time for emotions," he said, rising again. "That combination tends to make people around me nervous." "Then why hire someone like me?" she asked, her voice steady despite her confusion. He walked to his desk and opened a folder. "Because nervous people tell the truth, and because you need this job enough to fight for it." He closed the folder and met her gaze again. "Starting tomorrow, you will manage both professional and personal communications. You'll handle schedules, negotiations, and interruptions." His tone shifted at the last word, though she couldn't tell if it was irritation or regret. Then his eyes drifted toward the child again, and for a fleeting second, something else passed through them. Something human, something tired. "Your son will stay in the West Wing. There's a tutor and a caretaker ready for him. He'll have everything he needs." Elena hesitated. "I'd like to see where he'll be staying." Damian nodded to Margaret, who reappeared silently at the door. "Show her." The West Wing was warmer, brighter, filled with the scent of fresh flowers and sunlight streaming through tall windows. The room prepared for Liam looked like something from a fairy tale. A small library of children's books, a painted mural of stars on the ceiling, and even a miniature playground visible through the glass doors leading to the garden. The moment he saw it, Liam ran to the window with joy that lit up the room. For the first time in months, Elena felt tears of relief well up. Later that evening, when she returned to her quarters, she discovered a handwritten note on her desk. The handwriting was bold, precise, and unmistakably Damian's. "Trust is earned, not given. Tomorrow your real test begins. Remove your doubts, or they'll remove you." She stared at the words for a long time. What kind of test could he possibly mean? At dawn, she was woken by the soft chime of a bell outside her door. A uniform had been laid out for her, not the traditional servant's attire, but a simple, elegant black suit with a silver pin marked with the Grant insignia. Downstairs, she found Damian waiting in the study, his expression unreadable as always. "We have meetings all day," he said, handing her a tablet loaded with schedules, emails, and names she had never heard before. "Every person you speak to today will be watching you. They'll test your composure. I need you to be calm, precise, and invisible." "Invisible?" she repeated, arching a brow. "A shadow that moves when I move," he replied simply. You'll learn fast, or you'll fail fast. The morning passed in a blur. She followed him into meetings filled with powerful men and women who looked at her like she didn't belong. They spoke in numbers and decisions worth more money than she could imagine. Yet every time Damien gave her a quiet instruction, she responded without hesitation, writing, sending, arranging, remembering. By noon, she had learned more about discipline than any classroom could have taught her. When the final meeting ended, she turned to leave, exhausted. But Damien's voice stopped her. "Stay." He approached her slowly, his gaze fixed not on her face but on the tablet she held. "You made one mistake," he said softly, and she froze. "You deleted an email that was meant to be archived." Her heart sank. "I'm sorry. I didn't—" "Stop apologizing," he interrupted, his tone firm but calm. "Do you know why I wanted to see that reaction?" She frowned. "To see if I'd panic? To see if you'd lie?" He stepped closer, the space between them charged with quiet intensity. "Most people, when cornered, hide behind excuses. But you don't. You face the blow. That's rare." The air felt different suddenly, heavier, filled with words unspoken. Elena looked up at him, realizing that beneath all his arrogance, Damien Grant wasn't cold because he wanted to be. He was cold because life had taught him that warmth could destroy a man faster than failure ever could. After a long silence, he turned away. "That will be all for today. Go see your son. Tomorrow will be harder." That night, as Elena walked down the hall to Liam's room, she passed a locked door near the main staircase. It looked newer than the others, reinforced, almost like a vault. A faint light flickered from beneath it, and for a heartbeat, she thought she heard someone crying softly from inside. She leaned closer, but before she could knock, Margaret appeared at her side, her expression grave. "Never approach that door, Miss Brooks," she said quietly. "Some things in this house are not meant to be opened." Elena's pulse quickened, a chill creeping down her spine. She nodded and walked away, though her thoughts refused to settle. Behind that door was something, or someone, Damien was keeping hidden. As she tucked Liam into bed that night, she looked out through the glass window at the moonlight spilling across the garden. Somewhere inside that mansion, secrets slept. And she was beginning to realize that her new job was not about paperwork or schedules. It was about uncovering the man behind the walls, and whether she was ready for it or not. Damien Grant was already peeling away her fears, her hesitations, her masks, one by one, until only her true self remained. The door that should never open, morning light poured gently through the tall windows of the Grant estate, illuminating its silent hallways and gleaming marble floors. The mansion, so grand and vast, still felt strangely empty, like a beautiful painting missing its soul. Elena woke early, as she did every morning now, preparing breakfast for Liam before starting her duties. Her days were long but organized. Meetings, calls, and correspondence with business partners whose names carried global weight. Yet as efficient as she had become, she couldn't shake the feeling that the mansion itself watched her. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of air in the corridor seemed to hold its breath when she passed. She had been there only a week, but it already felt like months. Damien Grant's world operated on precision. Breakfast at 6, conference calls at 7, negotiations at 9. There was never laughter in those meetings, only logic, data, and control. Damien demanded perfection, and somehow Elena began meeting those demands. He noticed it too. Though he rarely praised, his silence grew softer, his tone less sharp. Yet she still sensed something buried beneath his calm exterior, a constant tension, as if he were carrying a secret too heavy to be shared. It wasn't until her second week that she saw the locked door again, the one Margaret had warned her never to approach. It was on the second floor near Damien's private study, framed by 2 old portraits of ancestors she had never heard of. Every time she passed it, a cold breeze seemed to brush her neck. Sometimes, late at night, she thought she heard faint sounds from within, a whisper, a rustle, something that didn't belong. She told herself it was her imagination, but deep inside, Curiosity began to grow like a spark waiting for air. One afternoon, after a long business meeting, Damien asked her to organize old company archives. He had gone out to attend a private investor dinner, leaving her in charge for the evening. As the sun began to set and the mansion bathed in amber light, Elena moved through the corridors carrying a stack of folders. That was when she noticed the faint glimmer under the forbidden door again, a golden light flickering like candle flame. She hesitated, her pulse quickening. Margaret's warning echoed in her head, but so did the unanswered question that had haunted her since that first night. What could possibly be locked away in a billionaire's house that even his employees weren't allowed to know about? It wasn't until her second week that she saw the locked door again, the one Margaret had warned her never to approach. It was on the second floor near Damien's private study, framed by two old portraits of ancestors she had never heard of. Every time she passed it, a cold breeze seemed to brush her neck. Sometimes, late at night, she thought she heard faint sounds from within, a whisper, a rustle, something that didn't belong. She told herself it was her imagination, but deep inside, curiosity began to grow like a spark waiting for air. One afternoon, after a long business meeting, Damien asked her to organize old company archives. He had gone out to attend a private investor dinner, leaving her in charge for the evening. As the sun began to set and the mansion bathed in amber light, Elena moved through the corridors carrying a stack of folders. That was when she noticed the faint glimmer under the forbidden door again, a golden light flickering like candle flame. She hesitated, her pulse quickening. Margaret's warning echoed in her head, but so did the unanswered question that had haunted her since that first night. What could possibly be locked away in a billionaire's house that even his employees weren't allowed to know about? Her hand trembled as she approached the door. The closer she got, the more she felt something strange. Not fear exactly, but sadness, heavy and deep, as though the air itself mourned. She bent slightly, peering through the tiny crack beneath the frame. All she could see was the faint outline of a photograph on the far wall, a woman and a little boy. Their smiles were bright, but time had blurred the faces, and beside the photograph stood a single chair turned toward the window. A small movement caught her eye, something shifting slightly in that chair, like the motion of someone breathing. Before she could move closer, a voice spoke behind her, calm but sharp as a blade. "I told you never to come near this door." Elena froze. Damien's voice was low, cold, and closer than she expected. She turned slowly to find him standing at the end of the corridor, his eyes dark with anger that looked too controlled to be ordinary. He hadn't gone to any dinner. He had been here all along. "I was just," she began, but he cut her off. "You were just breaking my trust," he said quietly, walking toward her. "You were told not to come here. Do you think my rules are suggestions?" She swallowed hard, trying to keep her voice steady. "You said you wanted honesty. So here it is. I wasn't trying to disobey you. I heard something, a noise, and I thought someone might be hurt." He stopped just in front of her, the space between them charged with silent tension. His gaze searched hers as if he were deciding whether she was telling the truth. Finally, he exhaled slowly, his anger softening, though not disappearing. "No one is hurt," he said in a low voice. "At least not anymore?" The way he said those words sent a chill through her. There was sorrow in his tone, not fury. The kind of sorrow that came from wounds too deep to heal. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "But you can't expect people to follow orders blindly when there are secrets like that behind locked doors." His jaw tightened. "That's exactly why I keep it locked. Some truths don't help anyone. They destroy what little peace is left." He turned away as if ending the conversation. But Elena's words followed him. "Peace isn't silence, Mr. Grant, it's acceptance. Whatever you're hiding, it's already destroying you." He stopped mid-step, shoulders stiffening. For a moment, the only sound was the soft ticking of the hallway clock. Then he said quietly, without turning around, "Go back to your work." And then he was gone. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. The storm that had started outside seemed to echo the turmoil in her mind. She stood by the window of her room, watching the rain blur the world into gray shapes. Across the garden, she saw a faint light flicker in the forbidden room again. Her heart ached with a feeling she couldn't name. Pity, curiosity, maybe something deeper. In the days that followed, Damien's behavior changed subtly. He was quieter, more withdrawn, sometimes staring out of windows for minutes at a time as if reliving something unseen. Yet when he spoke to her, his words carried a strange gentleness that hadn't been there before. He began to ask questions about her life, how she had managed as a single mother, how she had found courage to keep going after everything fell apart. At first, she thought he was simply trying to distract himself, but soon she realized he was trying to understand her strength because he had lost his own. One evening, as they worked late in the study reviewing company proposals, he closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair. "Do you ever wonder," he asked suddenly, "if pain is the only thing that reminds us we're alive?" Elena looked up from her notes, surprised. "Pain reminds us that we've survived something," she replied after a pause. "But it's not the only thing that makes life real. Hope does too. Love, faith, even fear. It all counts." He smiled faintly, a shadow of something fragile flickering across his face. "I used to think that too," he murmured, his voice barely audible, "until I lost everything I thought was unbreakable." She hesitated, then asked softly, "Was it behind that door?" His hand froze mid-air, the pen between his fingers trembling slightly before he placed it down. "You asked too many questions," he said, but there was no anger in his tone this time, only exhaustion. "Maybe," she said gently, "because someone should." The silence between them stretched long and heavy, but something shifted quietly in that moment. For the first time since she had met him, the coldness in Damien's eyes cracked, revealing a flicker of vulnerability that almost hurt to witness. Finally, he spoke, his voice rough with memories. "The woman in that photograph was my wife. The boy was my son." He paused, looking down at his hands. "They died 3 years ago in a car crash. I built this empire for them, and when they were gone, I built walls to keep the world from touching me again." Elena's breath caught. The mansion's silence suddenly made sense. It wasn't pride that filled its halls, but grief. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words carrying more sincerity than any apology she had ever spoken. He nodded slightly. "Everyone says that, but sorry doesn't fix the kind of emptiness that never stops echoing." She wanted to say something to comfort him, but there were no words strong enough to bridge the distance between their worlds. So instead she said quietly, "Then let me at least help you stop it from echoing." He looked at her, truly looked at her, and something unspoken passed between them. Not romance, not sympathy, but recognition. Two souls who had both lost too much but were still standing anyway. That night, when Elena returned to her room, she felt something deep inside her change. The fear she had felt toward Damien began to fade, replaced by understanding. He wasn't a monster hiding behind his power. He was a man trying to survive his ghosts. But even as she drifted toward sleep, one thought wouldn't leave her mind. The flicker of light behind that door had moved again earlier that evening. If his wife and child were gone, then who, or what, was still sitting inside that locked room? The mansion's walls seemed to breathe in the darkness, and Elena knew that her story with Damien Grant was only just beginning. The truth behind the door days turned into weeks, and the mansion that once felt like a cold fortress slowly began to breathe again. Elena noticed the smallest of changes first. A vase of fresh flowers on the table where only dust used to sit. Faint music playing in the evenings when the staff thought no one listened. The faintest trace of warmth in Damien Grant's voice when he spoke to his people. He was still the same disciplined, sharp-minded billionaire who ruled every minute of his life with precision. But there was a subtle crack in his armor now, a quiet softening that had begun ever since he opened the smallest part of his soul to Elena that night in the study. Yet one thing had not changed: the locked door on the second floor, the door that separated his past from the rest of the world. Elena often thought about what he had told her. about his wife and child, about the emptiness that never stopped echoing, but something about that story still felt incomplete. She had seen the light under that door, the moving shadow, the faint outline of a chair that seemed occupied. She told herself it was just his way of keeping the memory alive, a private sanctuary for grief. But another part of her, the part that had always listened to instinct, kept whispering that the truth was deeper, perhaps even darker. Still, she respected him enough not to ask again. She had already learned that Damian Grant was a man who only revealed what he wanted the world to see, one piece at a time, and forcing him would only push him back behind the ice he had begun to melt. Her focus turned to her work and to Liam. The little boy thrived in his new surroundings. The mansion's west wing had become his kingdom. He had teachers who encouraged his curiosity, gardens where he played with butterflies, and a library so large that he often got lost among the shelves. Every evening he ran to meet Elena after her long day, holding drawings of castles, rockets, and superheroes, each one, unknowingly, looking a little bit like Damian. When Elena saw that, her heart twisted in confusion. She had once thought of Damian as someone to fear, yet now she saw him laughing quietly when Liam told him stories about his imaginary adventures. Something about the way Damian listened to the boy, with patient eyes and a softness that no one else saw, revealed a truth Elena could never have imagined. That maybe, through her child, he was remembering how to feel again. One evening, after a long week of meetings, Elena walked into the garden for air. The moon was full, silver light washing over the marble fountains. The air smelled of jasmine and rain. As she sat by the stone bench near the lake, she heard footsteps behind her, steady, slow, familiar. She turned to see Damian approaching, his hands in his pockets, his usual dark suit replaced by a simple shirt and coat. It was the first time she had seen him without his armor of formality. For a moment he didn't speak. He simply stood there, looking out over the water. When he finally did, his voice was quiet. "I never come out here," he said. "My wife loved this garden. After she died, I stopped visiting it. It felt like the air still belonged to her." Elena looked at him, her tone gentle. "But she'd want you to see it again. She wouldn't want it to die with her." He nodded slowly, his eyes reflecting the moonlight. "You talk like someone who hasn't given up yet." "Because I can't afford to," she replied softly. "When life keeps breaking you, the only way to survive is to keep picking up the pieces." He turned to her then, his expression unreadable. "And what if there are pieces you can't pick up? Then you learn to build something new," she said, holding his gaze. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It was calm, like two souls resting for the first time after a long battle. But then Damian's phone buzzed, breaking the moment. He answered briefly, his expression shifting to that familiar steel again. "A former partner," he explained after ending the call. "He's been threatening to leak confidential data. He wants money I don't owe him." Elena frowned. "Can't your lawyers handle that?" "They can," he said, "but I prefer not to let others fight my battles. It's how I've always done things, alone," she sighed. "Maybe that's the problem, Mr. Grant. You fought too long without letting anyone stand beside you." He looked at her for a long time, as if her words were unlocking doors inside his mind. Then he said quietly, "If I let you stand beside me, Miss Brooks, I might forget how to stand alone." "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," she replied. He didn't answer, but the faintest smile curved his lips before he turned and walked away. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. The conversation replayed in her mind again and again. She felt drawn to him, not out of romance, but something deeper, like recognizing a wounded part of herself in another. But as she lay awake, she saw the faint glow under that forbidden door again. This time it was brighter, steadier. Her heart pounded. Something wasn't right. She slipped from her room, careful not to wake anyone, and moved quietly through the hall. The air was cold, heavy with silence. When she reached the door, she pressed her ear against it and froze. A voice was speaking inside. It was Damian's, low, trembling, full of grief. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I couldn't protect you. I thought building this empire would make the pain stop, but it only made me forget what mattered. If you can hear me, please, forgive me." Then came a sound, a quiet sob, the kind that broke something inside the listener. She couldn't stand there any longer. Without thinking, she turned the handle, and, to her surprise, it opened. The room was dimly lit, filled with photographs, children's toys, and a piano covered in dust. On the wall hung a portrait of a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, his late wife, and beside it a smaller photo of a little boy. The chair she had seen before faced the window, and on it sat Damien himself, his head bowed, his hands covering his face. He didn't move as she stepped inside. "I told you never to come here," he whispered. "I know," she said quietly, "but you don't have to be here alone anymore." He lifted his head then, eyes red, the mask of control completely gone. "You think you understand me," he said, voice breaking, "but you don't. I was driving the car that night. It was my fault. I survived, they didn't." Elena's heart ached. "It was an accident." "It was negligence," he said bitterly. "I was on the phone arguing about a deal. 1 second of distraction, and everything I loved was gone. I've lived every day since trying to buy forgiveness. But there's no price for peace." For the first time since she had met him, Damien Grant wasn't a billionaire, wasn't a businessman. He was just a broken man trapped in his own guilt. Elena stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You can't punish yourself forever," she said. "You honor them not by locking yourself away, but by living like they'd want you to. You have a chance to help people, to make something good out of what's left." The former partner tried again, louder, aiming the next barb at Elena. He said an assistant with no degree had no right to direct a foundation. He said her type manipulated men with grief. He aimed for humiliation because humiliation is a faster poison than doubt. The room waited. Elena felt the old fear rise. The fear that had once lived with unpaid bills and rooms too dark at night. Then she remembered the sentence she had spoken on the first day in his office. The sentence that had trembled out of her when she did not yet know the man he was. "Please don't make me take off my clothes." Back then the words had meant shame. Now they meant something else. She stepped to the second microphone and said in a calm voice that did not seek permission, "I will take off what covers the truth, and I will do it in public." She told the room in one long breath that she had dropped out of school to care for her father, that she had worked nights and mornings, that she had nearly lost her home, that she had stood in lines where names are called like numbers and no one looks at your face. She told them that the foundation's work did not come from charity, but from solidarity, from memory, from knowing how quickly health can fail and savings vanish. She said that if expertise meant knowing how to prevent a file from slipping between cracks, then yes, she was an expert. If expertise meant knowing how to tell a frightened mother that help would be there by evening, then yes, she was an expert twice over. And if expertise meant never forgetting how it feels to be treated as less, then she hoped she would never be cured of it. Then she lifted the folder of vendor minutes, opened it, and invited the journalists to sit with her after the forum and read every page. The room steadied again, not with cheers, but with a grounded hush. The former partner's smile thinned and the heat of his performance cooled under the plain light of facts. He muttered something about calls to make and left faster than he had arrived. The reporters stayed. As Damien stepped back, he met Elena's eyes. A gratitude passed between them that did not require speech. It said you did not hide. And it said thank you for not letting me hide either. The forum closed on time. And the applause at the end was not loud, but it was long. Like rain, you know, will last through the night. In the weeks that followed, the foundation settled into its rhythm. Cases were reviewed. Decisions were made, mistakes were recorded and fixed. The vendor contracts went online as promised. And the small office downtown, leased instead of purchased, on purpose, so money stayed close to the ground, became a place where people walked in with essays of their lives rather than forms. The staff learned to ask first what hurts most and next what can help by sunset. One afternoon, a woman arrived holding a toddler with a chest scar that glowed pink against new skin. She had used every coin to keep the child alive and now had nothing for rent. Elena read the discharge note, then walked her through the emergency grant. She asked the mother to sit for a few minutes while the card was prepared. The woman cried a quiet cry that did not ask for witnesses. Elena sat beside her without words, and when the woman left, she touched the doorknob as if doors had always pushed her away, and this one had finally pulled her in at the estate. Life became honest. Margaret allowed herself to set daffodils on the hallway table without fearing they would be seen as weakness. Liam learned the names of constellations from a telescope in the garden and told Damien that the smallest stars look like brave dots trying not to disappear. Damien laughed, a clean sound that surprised him. On some evenings, he and Elena met in the study to review case summaries and budgets. They worked with pens and silence and tea. There was no romance in those meetings, only respect and a tenderness that weaves itself through steady work. Once, when a newscaster ran a short piece praising the foundation, Elena looked at Damien and saw no triumph on his face, only relief, not the relief of reputation, but the relief of a man who had feared that the good he tried to do might fail people who needed it most. He had learned that success does not drown grief. It gives grief a place to set its cup down. The final turning came quietly on a late afternoon when the sky threatened rain but did not keep its promise. Elena found Damien in the room that had once been locked. The photos had not moved. The piano still wore its film of dust, but the chair no longer faced the window, it faced the door. He held a small box and stood when she entered. His voice was steady as he said he had been thinking about vows. Not the wedding kind, but the kind people make when no one is listening. The ones they make to the dead and then forget to keep for the living. He told her that he had vowed to disappear, to become stone so nothing could ever be taken from him again. And that vow had nearly taken everything left. He said he wanted to make a different vow now, to live in a way that did not fear love because love could be lost, to build work that could stand without his name pinned to its chest, to offer what he had without calculating who might someday use it against him. Then he set the small box on the table and opened it. Inside lay two simple objects, a house key and a worn seashell. He explained that the key belonged to a small coastal cottage where he and his family once spent weekends. He had not visited since the accident. He said he wanted the foundation to use it as a retreat for families who needed a place to breathe. Then he lifted the shell. He said his son had placed it in his palm on the last morning before they drove home. "Keep this, Daddy. It sounds like the ocean, even when the ocean is far." He placed the shell into Elena's hand and asked her to keep it at the foundation office on the front desk, where anyone could hold it for a moment before signing a form. To remember that sound travels even through hurt. They went to the cottage 2 weeks later, not for a ceremony, but to open the windows and let the sea air wash the rooms. The paint had chipped in places. The oven needed repair. The porch groaned a kind complaint, but the light poured in as if it recognized them. Liam ran to the waterline and chased gulls that refused to be caught. Damien stood at the edge of the porch for a long time, then took off his shoes, stepped onto the sand, and walked slowly to where the water met the shore. He did not look back to check if Elena watched. He did not speak. He simply let the waves arrive and leave, the way grief does. The way grace does, too. When he returned, his eyes were quiet. The kind of quiet that follows a long and necessary cry no one else needs to see. They cleaned the cottage until evening, made a list of repairs, and pinned a small card on the wall near the door that read, "This house keeps time with the sea. Take what you need, leave what you can, rest as long as you must." Months passed. The foundation helped more families than any of them had predicted. A few stories made the news and many did not, which was correct because not every rescue should be turned into a headline. The former partner's accusations dissolved under documents and time. The reporters who had come for sparks returned for a profile about practical goodness. They wrote that the Grant Foundation moved like a well-run clinic where money was medicine and dignity the first prescription. Elena never read the article twice. She preferred the handwritten letters that began to gather in a clear bowl on her desk. "Thank you for the extra month. Thank you for the food card. Thank you for not making me feel small." She found herself whispering those words back into the room after everyone had gone home, as if the walls deserved to hear them too. One evening, under a sky the color of deep lavender, Elena and Damien walked the garden path with mugs of tea. Margaret had retired for the night, and Liam had fallen asleep with a constellation chart open across his chest. They spoke about budgets and supply chains and how to keep the application process both fast and fair. Then they fell into a companionable quiet after a while. Damien said he had been thinking about the words Elena spoke at the forum. The words about taking off what covers the truth. He said he had learned that people are asked to undress their dignity every day by those who want power over them, and that the only undressing worth anything is when fear is removed from a heart, when shame is taken away from a face, when a person is asked to set down the heavy coat of survival long enough to rest. He turned to her and added, "I am grateful you never let anyone take from you what is not theirs. You taught me that trust is not demanded. It is earned by standing in light even when light makes you visible." She looked at him and said the sentence that finished their story without ending it. "You did it anyway." The line that had once sounded like a warning now sounded like a benediction. "You opened the room, you faced the ocean, you chose the light?" He nodded, and for a moment the night gave a small wind that moved the jasmine, as if the air itself approved. Years later, people who visited the coastal cottage would remark that it felt like a place built by someone who had known both loss and mercy. At the foundation office, the small seashell still sat beside a clear bowl of letters and a tin of mint candies for the children. Sometimes visitors lifted the shell and listened for the ocean. The front desk volunteers always smiled and said the same thing. "It sounds like the sea because the sea is patient. It keeps arriving. It keeps forgiving the shore." In the mansion, which no longer felt like a museum of sorrow, the door remained open, not as a passage to the past, but as a window to the vow that had replaced the old one. And in a city where storms still came and bills still piled up on too many tables, people learned that there was a place where help did not ask them to become small to receive it, where no one would ever ask them to remove their dignity to earn their future. That was the real wealth after all, not the marble, not the markets, but a room where light stayed on, a porch that faced the tide, a family made by choices rather than chance. And as for Elena and Damien, their story continued without fanfare. They worked. They argued about details and agreed on values. They celebrated small victories with quiet dinners where Liam announced new star names he had invented. Sometimes they went to the sea, and sometimes the sea came to them in the sound of the shell pressed to a new palm in the office. They did not promise the world to anyone. They promised the next right step, and then the next. And then the next. One evening, long after sunset, Elena stood at the study window and watched the lanterns along the path glow like patient stars. She thought about the first day she had walked into this place afraid of losing herself. She thought about the sentence that had carried her fear and her fight. "Please don't make me take off my clothes." She smiled, not at the old terror, but at the new truth. The only things she had removed here were doubt, shame, and the belief that survival meant silence. The rest of her, her worth, her voice, her dignity, remained clothed in light. And that light did not humiliate, it healed.